My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I hold a top-secret clearance and brief Pentagon officials on threats that could reshape global security. Last year, I helped prevent a cyberattack that would have crippled half the East Coast's power grid. But to my family, I'm nothing more than a government desk jockey who chose a dead-end career over joining their real estate empire. As I stood in my car outside their Potomac Falls mansion last Thanksgiving, watching through the golden-lit windows as they carved turkey without me, they thought they had finally rid themselves of their greatest embarrassment. What they didn't know was that the convoy of black SUVs turning onto their pristine cul-de-sac wasn't lost. Those vehicles carried my Pentagon security detail, and they were about to deliver the most devastating Thanksgiving surprise my family would ever receive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The November air was crisp that Thursday evening, carrying the scent of wood smoke from chimneys throughout the exclusive Potomac Falls neighborhood. I sat in my Honda Civic, feeling utterly out of place among the Teslas and BMWs lining the circular driveway of the Mitchell family estate. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the colonial mansion, I could see my family gathered around the mahogany dining table that had hosted Thanksgiving for 3 generations. My father, Robert Mitchell, sat at the head in his perfectly pressed button-down, carving what looked like a 20-pound turkey with surgical precision. My mother, Patricia, floated between the kitchen and dining room in her cream-colored cashmere sweater, ensuring every detail was Instagram perfect. My sister Jessica laughed at something one of her tech executive friends had said, her designer dress catching the light from the crystal chandelier. The scene was picture perfect. Exactly the kind of cultivated perfection the Mitchell family was known for throughout Northern Virginia's elite circles. There was just one problem with this Norman Rockwell tableau. I was supposed to be sitting in the empty chair between my parents, the chair that had been set but would remain vacant all evening. They had made sure of that 3 hours earlier, when my mother's text message arrived with the coldness of a diplomatic ultimatum. Rebecca, after careful consideration, we've decided it's best if you don't join us today. Your presence has become too disruptive to family harmony. Perhaps it's time you focused on building relationships that actually matter. I had stared at that message for a full 10 minutes, reading it over and over, trying to process the casual cruelty of being disinvited from Thanksgiving via text. No phone call, no explanation, just a digital dismissal that felt like a slap across the face. But I had driven here anyway, some stubborn part of me refusing to believe they would actually go through with it. Some naive corner of my heart still hoped that when I knocked on the door, someone would remember I was family too. The irony wasn't lost on me that earlier that same morning I had been in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, discussing threats to national security with officials whose decisions shaped international policy. I held clearances that took years to obtain and maintained access to information that could alter the course of nations. Yet here I sat, banned from a family dinner like a teenager who had broken curfew. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Trusted with state secrets, but not trusted with the Mitchell family's precious Thanksgiving tradition. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Jessica. Saw your car outside. Seriously, Becca? Take the hint and leave. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked up at the house again, and caught a glimpse of her peeking through the curtains, her face twisted in annoyance. She quickly disappeared back into the warm glow of the dining room, probably reporting to the others that their unwanted relative was still lurking outside like some pathetic stalker. The exclusion stung, but it wasn't unexpected. This had been building for months, ever since I had made the mistake of declining their latest attempt to recruit me into Mitchell Properties. They had presented it as a generous offer, a senior position in their development firm, complete with a corner office and a salary that would have tripled my government income. All I had to do was abandon the career I had built over 15 years, give up my security clearance, and become another cog in the Mitchell family machine. When I politely but firmly declined, explaining that I found my work meaningful and challenging, the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. My father's expression had hardened into the same mask of disappointment I remembered from childhood. Rebecca, he had said in that patronizing tone that suggested I was still the confused little girl who had once announced she wanted to be an astronaut. You're 35 years old. It's time to stop playing government games and join the real world. This family business has provided for 3 generations. It's what puts food on your table, whether you acknowledge it or not. I had wanted to point out that I paid for my own food, my own apartment, my own everything. But I had learned long ago that logic rarely penetrated the Mitchell family's carefully constructed reality. In their world, success was measured in property values and profit margins, not in service to country or personal fulfillment. My career in intelligence was viewed as an extended phase, like a rebellious teenager dyeing their hair black, amusing for a while, but ultimately something to be outgrown. The conversation had deteriorated from there, with Jessica chiming in to suggest that my reluctance to join the family business showed a fundamental lack of loyalty and gratitude. "Do you have any idea how many people would kill for this opportunity?" she had demanded, gesturing around their Tyson's Corner offices with their marble floors and Italian leather furniture. "But you'd rather sit in some windowless government building, pretending your little reports actually matter." That comment had cut deeper than she probably intended. My little reports had contributed to operations that prevented terrorist attacks, disrupted international money laundering schemes, and protected American interests in some of the world's most volatile regions. But to my family, none of that mattered, because it didn't translate into the kind of tangible wealth and social status they valued. The irony was that my grandfather, Thomas Hayes, had understood perfectly. Before he passed away 2 years ago, he had been my strongest supporter, the one person in the family who appreciated that not everyone was cut out for real estate development. Tom had served as an Air Force colonel, before transitioning to government contracting, building a successful business through integrity and hard work, rather than cutting corners and exploiting connections. He had always told me that service to country was the highest calling, regardless of the pay scale. "Your parents see dollar signs where others see duty," he had told me during one of our last conversations. "But you've got something they never understood: purpose beyond profit. Don't let them convince you that money is the only measure of a life well lived." His words echoed in my mind as I sat outside their house, watching through the windows as they celebrated without me. Tom would have been appalled by their behavior, disgusted by the way they had chosen to handle their disappointment with my career choices. He had raised my mother to be better than this, though somewhere along the way she had lost sight of the values he had tried to instill. A movement in my rearview mirror caught my attention, and I glanced back to see a black Suburban with government plates turning onto the street. Then another. And another. My pulse quickened as I recognized the distinctive convoy formation: 3 vehicles, tinted windows, communications antennas that marked them as official government transportation. I checked my phone for any missed messages from work, wondering if there was some emergency that required my immediate attention, but found nothing. The lead vehicle slowed as it approached the Mitchell house, and I felt my heart rate spike. This couldn't be a coincidence. Government security details didn't just happen to cruise through Potomac Falls on Thanksgiving evening. As the convoy came to a stop directly behind my car, I saw the outline of figures moving inside the vehicles, the kind of purposeful movement that suggested this was a planned operation, not a random patrol. My phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID to see Marcus Chen's name on the screen. Marcus was my attorney, a former JAG officer who had helped me navigate some legal complexities related to my security clearance a few years back. We had become friends over time, bonding over our shared experience of military families who didn't quite understand our career choices. But Marcus calling on Thanksgiving evening, just as a government convoy pulled up behind me, couldn't be a coincidence. "Marcus," I answered, my voice tight with confusion and growing apprehension. "Becca, where are you right now?" His voice carried an urgency I had never heard before, the kind of sharp focus that suggested something significant was happening. "I'm sitting outside my family's house, watching them have Thanksgiving dinner without me." "Marcus, what's going on?" "There are government vehicles behind me, and I'm starting to think this isn't a coincidence." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like Marcus taking a deep breath. "Becca, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not get out of your car, do not approach your family's house. The men in those vehicles are there for you, but not in the way you might think. We have a situation that changes everything about your relationship with your family, and I mean everything." My mouth went dry. In 15 years of government service, I had learned to recognize the tone of voice that preceded life-altering information. It was the same tone I used when briefing officials about threats that required immediate attention, the careful modulation that suggested the world was about to shift on its axis. What kind of situation? I managed to ask, though part of me already suspected I didn't want to know the answer. The kind that involves federal crimes, systematic fraud, and a family that has been using your security clearance and government position in ways that could destroy your career and land you in federal prison. Becca, your family hasn't just been dismissive of your career, they've been exploiting it. And we have evidence. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I stared at the house again, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at my family gathered around their perfect table, and suddenly the entire scene looked different. The Thanksgiving dinner I had been excluded from wasn't just a family gathering. It was a celebration I was apparently funding through means I hadn't even known about. "How long have you known?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We've been investigating for 3 months." I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything, and I wanted to have all the legal protections in place to shield you from any fallout. "Becca, what I'm about to tell you is going to hurt, but I need you to stay strong. Your family has been using your name, your clearance, and your position to facilitate business deals that cross into federal crimes territory. They've been selling access to you without your knowledge, using your reputation to vouch for projects that never should have received government contracts." I felt sick, the kind of nausea that comes from realizing your entire understanding of reality has been built on lies. How is that even possible? I never gave them access to anything classified. They didn't need classified information, Marcus interrupted gently. They just needed your name, your title, your security clearance level. That was enough to open doors that should have stayed closed, to create the impression that their projects had government backing or approval. Becca, they've been essentially selling your reputation to the highest bidder for years. Through the window of the house, I watched my father raise his wine glass in what appeared to be a toast, his face animated with the kind of jovial satisfaction that comes from a particularly successful business deal. My mother smiled and clinked her glass against his, while Jessica laughed at something one of their guests had said. They looked like people celebrating a victory, not a family missing one of their own. "The security detail," I said slowly, pieces of a horrifying puzzle beginning to click into place. "They're not here to protect me, are they?" "Actually, they are," Marcus said, and I could hear the sound of car doors closing in the background of his call. "But they're protecting you from your family, not with them. Becca, your father and mother are about to be arrested for federal conspiracy charges. Jessica is facing charges related to money laundering and fraud. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because we've been able to prove you had no knowledge of their activities." I sat in stunned silence, watching my family through the window as they continued their Thanksgiving celebration, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse around them. The irony was almost unbearable. They had banned me from dinner to protect their family harmony, not knowing that their crimes were about to destroy any chance of family unity forever. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but insistent. "We found documents, Becca. Financial records, communications, contracts. Your grandfather, Tom, he had been investigating them before he died. He suspected what they were doing, and he left evidence. Evidence that not only proves their crimes, but also proves that everything you inherited from him was supposed to be protected from their access. They've been stealing from his estate, too." The mention of my grandfather sent a fresh wave of pain through my chest. Tom had always been the moral center of the family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The one person who had truly understood honor and integrity. The thought that he had died knowing his own daughter and son-in-law were criminals, that he had spent his final months trying to protect me from their schemes, was almost too much to bear. "What happens now?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos in my mind. "Now, you're going to get out of your car and walk away from that house. The security detail will escort you to a secure location where we can debrief you on everything we've found. And then, tomorrow, you're going to watch your family face the consequences of their actions. But Becca, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't your fault. You were their victim, not their accomplice." As if choreographed, The doors of the 3 black vehicles opened simultaneously, and 6 men in dark suits emerged. They moved with the precise coordination of a federal tactical team, their posture professional but unmistakably authoritative. I recognized the lead agent, Special Agent David Park, from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, someone I had worked with on joint intelligence operations in the past. Agent Park approached my car window and tapped gently. When I rolled it down, his expression was a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine sympathy. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but we need to get you somewhere safe where we can talk. There are some things you need to know about your family's business activities, and time is of the essence." I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and stepped out of my car. As I stood on the sidewalk, I took one last look at the house where I had been raised, where I had spent countless Thanksgivings listening to my parents' plans for expansion and growth, where I had been made to feel like a disappointment for choosing service over profit. Through the window, I could see my family still gathered around their table, my father probably telling one of his favorite stories about a particularly lucrative deal, my mother ensuring everyone's wine glass stayed full, Jessica no doubt sharing gossip from her tech industry networking events. They had no idea that in a matter of hours, federal agents would be knocking on their door with arrest warrants. They had no idea that their carefully constructed empire was built on a foundation of crimes that carried decades of prison time. They had no idea that the daughter they had just disinvited from Thanksgiving was the only reason they had been allowed to enjoy one last family meal before their world came crashing down. As I walked toward the waiting vehicles, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a profound sadness for the family that could have been. If they had chosen differently, if they had valued integrity over profit, honor over wealth, we might have been sitting around that table together, sharing stories and gratitude instead of lies and stolen money. But they had made their choices, just as I had made mine. They had chosen to build their success on deception and exploitation, while I had chosen to build mine on service and sacrifice. Now finally, the consequences of those choices were about to become clear to everyone. Agent Park held open the door of the lead vehicle, and I slid into the back seat, leaving behind the family that had never truly accepted me, and stepping into an uncertain future that was nonetheless my own. As we drove away from Potomac Falls, I realized that while I was losing the family I had been born into, I was about to discover the true meaning of justice, and perhaps, eventually, peace. The secure conference room in the FBI's Washington field office felt like a tomb at 10 o'clock that Thanksgiving night. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the mahogany table, where Agent Park had spread out what looked like evidence from a decade-long investigation. Marcus Chen sat across from me, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something I had never seen before, genuine concern mixed with barely contained anger. The third person in the room was someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Rebecca, this is Sarah Williams," Agent Park said, gesturing toward the woman. "She's our lead forensic accountant specializing in federal contract fraud. She's been piecing together your family's activities for the past 8 months." Sarah nodded grimly and opened a thick manila folder. "Ms. Mitchell, what I'm about to show you represents one of the most sophisticated schemes we've encountered involving the exploitation of security clearances for private gain. Your family didn't just use your name, they created an entire shadow operation built around your credentials." The first document she placed in front of me was a contract between Mitchell Properties and a defense contractor I recognized from my Pentagon briefings. The contract was for a massive residential development project near Quantico, valued at over $50 million. What made my blood run cold was seeing my name listed as a, quote, government liaison and security consultant on a project I had never heard of, much less approved. "I never signed this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never even heard of this development." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "We know. Your signature is forged, but it's a very good forgery. Good enough to fool the contractors who awarded this deal based partly on the assumption that it had Pentagon backing through you." She placed another document on the table, then another. Each one showed my name being used to legitimize deals that should never have received government approval. Housing developments near sensitive military installations, office complexes that somehow received expedited security clearances. Commercial projects that benefited from insider knowledge about upcoming government relocations and base expansions. How long has this been going on? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Agent Park consulted his notes. The earliest forgery we can definitively prove dates back 7 years, right around the time you received your top-secret clearance and your assignment to strategic intelligence briefings. But we suspect it started even earlier, possibly when you first obtained your secret clearance. 7 years. 7 years of my family using my career, my reputation, my integrity as a commodity to be traded for their financial gain. Every family dinner where they had seemed disinterested in my work, every conversation where they had dismissed my achievements as insignificant, they had been lying. They had been paying very close attention to my career, not because they were proud of me, but because they were figuring out how to exploit it. There's more, Sarah said, her tone becoming even more serious. The development project near Quantico wasn't just about making money. The location they chose puts civilian housing within the security perimeter of classified facilities. Your family's project could have compromised national security. The weight of that statement hit me like a freight train. My family hadn't just committed fraud. They had potentially endangered the same national security I had dedicated my life to protecting. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Marcus leaned forward, his lawyer instincts taking over. Rebecca, I need you to understand the legal implications here. If the government couldn't prove your innocence, you would be facing charges that carry 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Conspiracy, espionage, treason, the works. But you can prove my innocence? I asked, grasping for some stability in this nightmare. We can and we have, Agent Park assured me. Your digital footprint, your communications, your financial records, everything shows you had no knowledge of these activities. In fact, your family went to extraordinary lengths to keep you in the dark. Sarah pulled out a laptop and opened what appeared to be a communications log. We intercepted messages between your parents and sister discussing how to handle you. Look at this exchange from 6 months ago. She turned the screen toward me and I read the text messages with growing horror. Robert Mitchell. Rebecca's asking too many questions about the Quantico project. She saw the Mitchell Properties sign when she drove past last week. Patricia Mitchell. We need to be more careful. Maybe it's time to distance her from family business discussions entirely. Jessica Mitchell. I still think we should just bring her in. She could be useful if she actually cooperated instead of playing government hero. Robert Mitchell? Absolutely not. The moment she knows, everything falls apart. She's too much of a Boy Scout. Keep her focused on her little spy games and away from anything that matters. Reading those words felt like being stabbed in the chest. Little spy games. That's how my father referred to work that had taken me to some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Work that required me to make life-and-death decisions about threats to American lives. To him, my career was just a distraction from what really mattered, their criminal enterprise. There's worse, Marcus said quietly, and I wasn't sure I could handle anything worse. He placed a financial document in front of me. Rebecca, they've been systematically stealing from you for years. Not just using your name for contracts, but actually taking your money. The document showed my checking account, but the numbers made no sense. Regular transfers out that I had never authorized, charges to credit cards I had never opened, investments made in my name that I had never approved. My modest government salary had been supplemented by what appeared to be kickbacks from the very contracts my name had been used to secure. I never saw any of this money, I said, staring at the numbers in disbelief. Because they intercepted it all, Sarah explained. They had mail forwarded from financial institutions. They opened accounts in your name with false addresses. They created an entire parallel financial identity for you. As far as these banks and investment firms knew, you were a very active client making substantial profits from government consulting work. Agent Park pulled out another folder. The most damaging evidence comes from your grandfather's files. Thomas Hayes suspected what his daughter and son-in-law were doing, and he spent the last year of his life building a case against them. The mention of my grandfather sent fresh pain through my chest, but this pain was different. It was the ache of recognition, of puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. That's why he kept asking me about my finances, I said slowly. I thought he was just being protective, making sure I was saving for retirement. But he was trying to figure out if I knew what they were doing. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Tom Hayes was a smart man. He realized that his daughter's real estate business was succeeding too quickly, making deals that seemed impossible without inside information. He started investigating, and what he found horrified him. Sarah opened yet another folder, this one marked with Tom's careful handwriting. Your grandfather documented everything. Phone calls where your parents discussed which of your briefings might contain useful information. Conversations about timing property acquisitions to coincide with government announcements you might have advanced knowledge of. Planning sessions for how to approach contractors with the implicit suggestion that their projects had Pentagon approval. I stared at my grandfather's meticulous notes, written in the same careful script I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas letters. He had known his own daughter was a criminal, and he had been trying to protect me while building a case to stop her. The lonely last year of his life suddenly made sense. He hadn't been withdrawing from the family due to age or illness. He had been conducting a covert investigation of his own relatives. Why didn't he tell me, I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Agent Park's expression was sympathetic. According to his notes, he was planning to. He had an appointment with the FBI scheduled for the week after he died. Heart attack took him before he could officially report what he had found. The timing of his death suddenly seemed less like natural causes and more like tragic irony. If Tom had lived another week, this entire nightmare might have been prevented. Instead, he had died knowing his daughter was betraying everything he had taught her about honor and integrity, unable to stop the scheme that was destroying the granddaughter he loved. There's one more thing, Marcus said, and his tone suggested this might be the worst revelation yet. Rebecca, your family didn't just exclude you from Thanksgiving dinner on a whim. They've been planning to cut you off completely for months. He handed me a printed email chain that made my stomach drop. The messages were between my parents and a lawyer I didn't recognize, discussing how to minimize Rebecca's potential exposure to family business operations and, quote, create plausible distance in case of federal investigation. One email from my mother was particularly chilling. We need Rebecca to believe she's being excluded for personal reasons, not business ones. If she thinks we're just disappointed in her career choices, she won't look deeper into why we're pulling away. Make sure the Thanksgiving invitation comes across as a family harmony issue, not a legal strategy. They had weaponized my lifelong insecurity about their approval, using my emotional vulnerabilities as a smokescreen to hide their criminal activities. The rejection that had hurt so deeply wasn't even real. It was a calculated move designed to protect their fraud scheme. So when my mother texted me that my presence was disruptive to family harmony, I said slowly, she was really saying that my presence was dangerous to their criminal enterprise. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. They were trying to establish a pattern of estrangement that would make it believable you knew nothing about their activities. If federal investigators came calling, they wanted to be able to say that you had been distant from the family for months, that you couldn't possibly have been involved in business decisions. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cynicism. They had turned my greatest fear, being rejected by my family, into a legal defense strategy. Every moment of pain I had felt sitting outside their house that evening had been orchestrated, designed to serve their purposes while leaving me isolated and confused. Agent Park checked his watch. Rebecca, it's almost midnight. In 6 hours, we're going to execute arrest warrants for your parents and sister. I wanted you to hear the truth from us first, rather than finding out from news reports. The reality of what was about to happen hit me like a sledgehammer. By morning, my family would be in federal custody. Their faces would be on the news. Their crimes would be public knowledge. Their empire would be in ruins. The Mitchell name, which had meant something in Northern Virginia real estate circles, would become synonymous with fraud and corruption. What happens to me? I asked, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You go back to your life, Rebecca. Your security clearance is safe. Your job is secure. Your reputation is intact. In fact, your cooperation with this investigation is going to be noted in your personnel file as exemplary service to national security. But my family, your family made their choices, Sarah interrupted gently, but firmly. They chose money over integrity, greed over honor. They chose to exploit your service rather than respect it. These are the consequences of their decisions, not yours. Agent Park began gathering the documents spread across the table. There will be a trial, probably in 8 to 10 months. You'll likely be called as a witness, but as a victim, not a defendant. Your testimony about how they kept you in the dark will actually help establish their criminal intent. I sat in the stark conference room, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, trying to process the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life. The parents who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had sent me to Sunday school and emphasized the importance of honesty, they had been criminals all along. The sister I had looked up to, despite her condescending attitude, had been actively participating in a scheme that could have landed me in federal prison. I need to ask you something, I said to the 3 professionals who had just dismantled my entire understanding of reality. Was any of it real? Their disappointment in my career, their frustration with my choices, was any of that genuine? Or was it all just performance? Sarah exchanged glances with Agent Park and Marcus before answering. Based on the communications we intercepted, their disappointment seems to have been genuine, but not for the reasons you thought. They weren't disappointed because they wanted you to join the family business out of love or tradition. They were disappointed because having you actively involved in their legitimate operations would have made it harder to use your name for their illegitimate ones. The truth was somehow worse than I had imagined. They hadn't rejected me because I wasn't good enough for their world. They had rejected me because I was too good for their world, because my integrity threatened their corruption. My moral compass, the very thing my grandfather had been proudest of, had made me a liability in their criminal enterprise. So when they said I didn't understand the real world, I continued, needing to understand the full scope of their deception, they meant I didn't understand their criminal world. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Your commitment to doing things the right way, your respect for the law, your dedication to service, all of that made you dangerous to them. They needed you to stay naive and distant so they could continue exploiting your reputation without interference. Agent Park stood up, signaling that our marathon briefing session was coming to an end. Ms. Mitchell, I know this has been overwhelming. We have counselors available if you need someone to talk through the emotional impact of these revelations. I shook my head. After 15 years in intelligence work, I had learned to compartmentalize trauma, to process information first and deal with emotions later. Right now, I needed facts and next steps, not therapy. What happens to their assets? I asked, my analytical mind already moving toward practical concerns. Sarah reopened her laptop. Everything acquired through criminal proceeds will be seized. The houses, the cars, the investment accounts. All of it becomes federal property. However, we've identified assets that were legitimately yours or that came from your grandfather's estate. Those will be returned to you. She showed me another document, this one a property listing for the Potomac Falls mansion, where I had been excluded from dinner just hours earlier. This house, for example, was purchased with proceeds from fraudulent contracts. It will be seized. But your grandfather's original property in Arlington, which your parents have been using as rental income, legitimately belongs to you according to his will. The irony was staggering. The house where my family had celebrated their success while excluding me would be taken away, while property I didn't even know I owned would be returned to me. Tom Hayes had been protecting me even from beyond the grave, ensuring that his legitimate wealth would be separated from his daughter's criminal gains. Marcus gathered his own papers and stood. Rebecca, I need you to understand something important. This investigation began because your grandfather's lawyer found irregularities in how his estate was being handled. Tom Hayes set up legal protections for you that your parents have been violating for 2 years. This isn't just about federal contract fraud. It's also about estate fraud and elder abuse. Another layer of betrayal. Another crime committed by people I had trusted. My parents hadn't just stolen from the government and exploited my career. They had also cheated me out of my inheritance from the one person who had truly understood and supported me. How much are we talking about? I asked, though part of me wondered if I really wanted to know. Sarah consulted her notes. Between the legitimate estate assets, the recovery of fraudulent proceeds, and the damages owed to you for identity theft and financial fraud, you're looking at somewhere between $2 and $3 million. The number was so large it didn't seem real. My grandfather had been wealthier than I had realized, and my parents had been stealing from both of us for years. Money that should have secured my future had instead funded their criminal lifestyle, while I lived in a modest apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda. Agent Park walked me to the door of the conference room. Rebecca, tomorrow is going to be difficult. The arrests will be public, the media will be intense, and you're going to be fielding calls from people who want to know how much you knew. We've prepared a statement for you to give to anyone who asks. Basically, that you cooperated fully with federal investigators and were found to be completely innocent of any wrongdoing. I nodded, though I suspected that the court of public opinion would be less forgiving than the federal justice system. In Washington, where perception often mattered more than reality, even being associated with this kind of scandal could damage a career. People would wonder how I could have been so naive, how I could have missed the signs, how someone with top-secret clearance could have been so thoroughly deceived by her own family. As we walked toward the exit, Marcus fell into step beside me. Rebecca, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I'll be handling all the legal aspects of your recovery case, and I'll be available 24/7 if you need anything. His kindness almost broke through the emotional walls I had been building all evening. After a day that had started with rejection and ended with revelation, having someone in my corner felt like a lifeline. The FBI building was nearly empty at this hour, our footsteps echoing in the marble hallways. As we reached the security checkpoint, Agent Park handed me his card. My personal number is on the back. If you think of anything else, if you remember any conversations or incidents that might be relevant, call me immediately. I stepped out into the cold November night, leaving behind the building where I had learned that my entire life had been built on lies. The black SUV that had carried me here was waiting at the curb, engine running, ready to take me back to my Arlington apartment, where I would try to process the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my family. As we drove through the empty streets of Washington, I stared out at the monuments illuminated against the dark sky, symbols of the ideals I had dedicated my life to serving. Honor, integrity, justice, truth. These weren't just abstract concepts to me, they were the foundation of everything I believed in. And now I had learned that while I was protecting those ideals from foreign threats, my own family had been attacking them from within. The driver pulled up to my building, and I sat for a moment in the back seat, reluctant to go upstairs to an apartment that would feel different now that I knew the truth. Everything would feel different now. Every memory of family gatherings, every conversation about my career, every moment of feeling like I didn't quite fit in, all of it would have to be re-examined through the lens of what I now knew. Tomorrow, the Mitchell family name would be splashed across news reports as a cautionary tale of greed and corruption. By tomorrow night, my parents and sister would be sleeping in federal detention cells instead of their expensive beds in their beautiful homes. The real estate empire they had built would crumble. The social standing they had cultivated would evaporate, and the lifestyle they had funded through crime would be exposed for what it truly was. But tonight, I was just Rebecca Mitchell, a government employee who had learned that the people who should have loved her most had instead used her most ruthlessly. Tonight, I was completely alone for the first time in my life, cut free from family ties that had turned out to be chains designed to bind me to their corruption. And, strangely, as I finally made my way up to my apartment, I realized that being alone felt better than being connected to people who had never really seen me as anything more than a tool to be exploited. The rejection that had hurt so much 12 hours earlier now seemed like a gift, a final act of unconscious honesty from people who had been lying to me for years. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.